Hey there, welcome to my channel. Today I will be doing a K-pop Demon Hunters one-shot video explanation, where I go into the detail and intention behind my original writing based off the hit movie K-pop Demon Hunters. Today's subject will be the character Celine and how she's characterized within the film. I wanted to expand on her as an individual before because she is shown to be one of the more emotionally complex characters within the film. Despite the fact that much of the community seems to dislike her, she does have a very complex and characterization, and I feel like it should definitely be explored in future films. So I decided to write a one-shot discussing this kind of characterization before the film releases in order to have a bit of a better understanding. And without further ado, let's go into explaining my writing once again. Okay, so starting off immediately, I set the setting once again because having an introduction is very important in all forms of media, but it's even more so important when you're doing specific one-off one-shots in which it's important to set up a bunch of information in as fast and as quickly as possible because there's not as much info the user or reader can grasp without prior context. Obviously, it is easier with having a universe to base it off, which is why this one immediately launches us into this sort of predicament, and with me immediately drawing in the reader's attention with the mention of a cemetery and some very important vivid imagery. So this one is a lot more detailed than I would typically do it, but I felt like doing it, which was the sun was veiled behind a curtain of dark clouds over the cemetery. So immediately it sets up the fact that this is probably like a funeral scene or someone mourning someone, and which is immediately answered by amongst the crowd heavy as they watch the body lower into the grave, meaning that it's likely a funeral. And then eventually I have one by one the onlookers left, so as more time passes and passes until I have two of this deceased closest friend and the daughter she had left behind. Now, with this being about K-pop Demon Hunters, I hope that some people will eventually put it together that the daughter is likely Rumi and the deceased closest friends are probably the two other Sunlight Sisters that we see briefly within the film, although they aren't. Or I guess one other Sunlight Sister and Celine. So we have the one unnamed Sunlight Sister. We have Myeryong, which is Rumi's mom and Celine. But the third Sunlight Sister, her name isn't actually mentioned, so I had to work around not mentioning her name as much as possible while being able to maintain her, fluidity within the writing. So what I do is I view her as sort of the opposite to Zoe as a parallel, because I imagine that Celine was probably a parallel with Mira and Rumi was probably paralleled with her mom, so the last one is probably paralleled to Zoe, which means she's most likely an emotional character in my perspective anyways. So I have her ask the question of what have we done, setting up this prior example that maybe it's their fault that this entire situation, and then I have the other friend, and this one will be Celine, and as exhibited through her face stone cold and looking at the tombstone, showing that she's a very cold-hearted, or at least she steels herself in this time of mourning. And then immediately we learn of her name, Celine, and I have the other friend mention that Celine shouldn't act like she's above this, and since she shouldn't be acting detached from Myeryong. So Celine comes off annoyed, not wanting to deal with this during their friend's funeral, trying to maintain her cold, emotionless self. So I imagine her speaking it in a very deadpan voice. It's like, Celine sighed, "What do you want me to say?" In sort of that type of manner. And I kind of give some prior knowledge about the events that might have happened before this scene, and it hints towards some sort of falling out that the Sunlight Sisters had prior to the death of her friend, or Myeryong, Rumi's mother, or because I imagine, in my headcanon at least, that Myeryong had revealed to the rest of the group that she had Rumi eventually, and then that some accident happened after. So I imagine that they left on bad terms, and then what happened was Miryung revealed the secret of Rumi and her relationship with the demon. Then they had a falling out. She left, and then Miryung ended up in like an accident or something, potentially a demon attack or whatever. But what happened is Celine is angry and says that was she not justified in scolding Miryung for having love with a demon? And she says that they're demon hunters, right? It goes against everything they stand for. And she gets a bit emotional while saying this. The other friend responds with, "It was love," and it's a pure, genuine emotion. It transcends different races, hunters and demons. They could feel it with one another, no matter what. And I decided to take some creative liberty and hint towards maybe Celine having a tragic past just as much as the others, right? By having this sort of, surely you could have understood that the most between the three of us, referencing the rest of the Sunlight Sisters, hinting towards some possibility that Celine had a relationship of her own that fell apart in some way or shape or form. Well, and while it isn't original, it's completely original and removed from the rest of the story, but I did want to add some more depth to Celine's character. This is obviously a very rough topic for Celine, so she kind of tries to back away from that, and I referenced 2 years because I don't really exactly know the timeline, but I decided that 2 years was probably good enough. And it also gave enough gravity to say that this secret was hidden for at least 2 years, likely more. The other friend responds by saying that maybe Miryong was wrong in hiding that secret, but that doesn't justify Celine to lash out. And then here I hint towards the fact that the father of Rumi was probably either absentee or died somewhere as well. And then this is where I wanted to try and speed up because these are all relatively short one-shots. So this one was 659 words, so I didn't want it to be too long. So I have Celine quickly wrap up the conversation in a smooth, natural tone and manner, or having her act just like annoyed, similar to how she was earlier, or wrapping it up quickly with only a couple lines of dialogue, and she just says, "Can we just not?" It's important to have dialogue flow very, very smoothly, and I think I utilize it quite well in this case, though I am open to more suggestions in the future. Eventually, the other friend leaves so that I don't have to continue dealing with her, and it also gives a sort of moment for the rest, because I mentioned previously that Rumi is still actually here. So when the friend leaves, the unnamed member of the Sunlight Sisters, I have Celine slowly collect herself as she tries to get over the emotions that were riding high after this conversation, but all of her silence, her serenity as she tried to collect herself, right, the silence enveloping her, I have it shattered and broken by the baby that was under her care, which is Rumi. So here I try to visually show Celine's hatred for demons and maybe some of her animosity towards them, and why she might have treated Rumi like she did in the movie, which is this, which I think is utilized extremely well. Excuse me for that, by the way. Okay. I show some of the inner conflict within Celine as she discusses how Miryong was her friend, but she had betrayed the group, and how that the question of who should take care of Rumi should go to. Obviously, she couldn't be put into foster care because a demon, obviously, and to explain why it was Celine and not the other friend, I decided to say that maybe it was just the other friend had her own issues as well. Maybe she had a family or something, but I didn't dive too much into that as well because this is a very Celine-centric one-shot. So this is like the conclusion to the rest of it, and this is where it sort of hints towards the events of what would eventually transpire within the movie, and that's as Celine sort of says in this bitter tone, so young and innocent, unaware of all the pain that you and your kind have caused. So here she's kind of grouping Rumi in with the demon. She wholeheartedly views and connects Rumi as a demon and doesn't even understand parts of her humanity. But this is where a like slow turning happens, and it's all very condensed. And I wish I could have made it longer, but once again, it's a one shot. But basically, what happens is she looks at Rumi and she sort of makes connections to the her friend Miriam, and she starts making connections between the facial features, and eventually she's kind of falters is and then I have this moment where she says seemed more human than demon, and that's sort of the breaking point that allows Celine to try and start taking care of that child more. So she reaches her hand in sort of this kindness, and it's instead of this cold bitter tone that she was earlier, and she let herself enjoy the moment as the baby's hand wrapped around her finger. And then this is where she makes a promise to Miriam, where she says that she'll promise to make sure that Rumi grows up safe. She'll live a pure life untouched by the cursed blood, obviously referring to demon, and she'll never fall to the darkness. So this is where you kind of see the unhealthy side of Celine's parenting, which is that this is how you know for sure that Celine views the demonic part of her body as evil and something not to love, which I think is very important to preface, because while Celine may be an extremely flawed character, she still does truly love Rumi, and still it does come from a place of fear, because she was a hunter. She's seen things, and potentially maybe the rest of the Sunlight Sisters might have been killed, maybe whatever, but there's obviously some sort of history. I have a sort of filler space where I have the baby Ku, so Rumi Ku's unaware of the weight behind those words, because obviously these words kind of solidify the sort of solidify the events that will eventually happen in the movie. And then I have the classic sort of message sending cliffhanger ending of a one shot. Anyways, that's it for this one shot. Check out the rest of them on my channel page, or check out the shorts where I explain them, or read the full one shots yourself in the comment down below in order to read it without my yapping. And that's it. See you all next week.